Hey folks, walk with me. Well, I have a UFO story for you today. I have a couple, so we'll see if I get through the first one quickly enough. Maybe we'll double dip it. But I think I only have two. And one of them, which is the one that I actually think is more interesting, is actually secondhand. It's not mine, but it's from a couple of family members, which makes it even more interesting. There's two people involved. So let me set the stage for you so that you understand where this took place and sort of the geographical region and the lay of the land, if you will. So I grew up on a 200-acre family farm, and this happened before I was born. So this happened to my uncle, my dad's only brother. There were 5 kids total, so 3 sisters, 2 brothers, and this was his older brother. And this would have happened, I don't know for sure, but just taking into account ages and birth dates, would have been late 60s or early 70s. And my grandfather, who plays a role in this story, was born in before the Depression. He grew up in the Depression, but he was born in the early to mid 1920s on the farm, and was a very, we could euphemistically put it as a no-nonsense person. He was very strict, we could say. And that's just to say he's not the kind of person who I would expect to go along with some, especially at that point in time, 60s and 70s, go along with some concocted story by his oldest son of spotting a UFO. It was more than spotting, but okay, so that's the lay of the land. Those are the people involved. Uncle and grandfather. My grandfather, not his grandfather, his father. Now, where my grandparents' house was, there was a road that you would cross, and you would go down a trail, and that's where the bulk of the land was. Probably 2/3 or more of the land was down that trail. You would go across a creek that was rarely too high to drive a tractor across. Sometimes it was a little too dicey, but almost always you could drive a tractor across it, even with a wagon, with hay bales or straw bales or whatever. And so that's where they were. They were across the creek, and across the creek there were 4 fields. There was one field relatively low, nearest to the creek. And then you had to go up a very steep hill. This was the most terrifying part of the whole thing. You had to go up this very steep hill that coming down was very treacherous. Going up, there were several times where the wheels on the tractor would sort of be very close to popping up because you're at such a steep incline. And on the way down, there was a few times where, because it was muddy, the tractor had slid and nearly crashed, tipped over, etc., etc. So very steep incline. And when you got to the top of that incline, it opened up into the first field. And then there were adjoining fields next to it. So 3 total. And they would have sort of hedgerows in between. Each of those fields is probably 2 to 3 acres, I would imagine. So my uncle was at the very top of that steep incline at that very first field. And I think he was raking hay. He was on a tractor, he was pulling the rake, and it was just turning the hay over, right? My grandfather was on a tractor, likely doing the same thing, at the lower field, the one nearest to the creek. And so apparently it was getting very near to dark. It was a dusky hour. And they were trying to finish up, and my grandfather had finished. And he drives up that very steep incline and gets to the top because he needs to go see, you know, how far along my uncle is, because they need to be heading home. Like I said, it's going to be dark. And he gets to so his version of the story is he gets to the top of the hill, to that incline, and because it's such a steep incline, his lights on his tractor are pointed, you know, very up. Like, you can't see anything until you sort of get to the plateau. And it was very much like that. It was like you're up the side of a mountain, and then you plateau. When you plateau, your lights, you know, level out, and then you can see straight ahead. And so he's up there, he's about to level out, and as he does, and his lights come down through the sky toward the ground, he sees this disc over the field, like fairly low over the field. And as his lights hit it, as the story goes, the thing took off. So that was all that he saw. Lights hit this thing and it jets. Now, what happened to my uncle, who was up there, is he was doing his thing on the tractor, and all of a sudden this disc appears from the sky, lowers down toward him. Here's where it gets really crazy. As it's over him, his tractor, all on its own, shuts off. Assuming there that the craft, or something to do with the craft, caused his engine to shut down. And so he's just there, dead in the water, and, you know, it's just with this thing directly over him. And it just so happened that as his tractor shut off, and he was probably terrified, the lights from my grandfather's tractor come up, come down, sweep across the site of the craft, and it takes off. His tractor starts back up as it moves, and, you know, obviously he's freaking out. And they talk about what they had each seen. They get themselves home. As far as I recall, they then spoke about it to my grandmother, and what she had said was that he was just, especially my uncle, was just like a ghost. Like, he was, you know, clearly just in sheer terror mode. And I don't know what then the aftermath was in the following days and weeks. Maybe outwardly nothing. I assume inwardly it was probably, you know, took its toll for quite some time. But I mean, like I said, these are Depression era parents on a farm, and the mindset is not anything along the lines of like, okay, let's explore what happened here and try to make sense of it, or try to move past it by processing it. That's not in the frame of reference. It is, we have to eat tomorrow, we have livestock that can't die, and we got to wake up and get back to work. So go to sleep, right? So it's probably something more along those lines than anything else. But yeah, that was always quite a crazy story. Again, it's hard to relay that. It's, to me, much more credible, not only because it's two people having some shared experience, but just the mindset and the persona of the people involved was just not one of flights of fancy. And again, especially for my grandfather. So there you go. If you have UFO stories, would be curious to hear about them in the comments below. But that's mine, and my personal one, which I also experienced with someone else. I will save that for another time because we're getting a little long in the tooth, as they say, for this video. But I'll make that maybe a shorter one because that's a significantly shorter story. But yeah, I'd be curious to hear what you all have experienced, if you have any such thing in your own life. All right, folks, so we got 11 minutes in on the walk, so a bit over a half mile if you walked along with me, and if you didn't, no worries. I always appreciate you watching this far. And speaking of always, as always, I will see you in the next video.